Hello, welcome to SASS 02 Hero. So in this fast track, we're going to get started using SASS. So we're going to install some software and then I'm going to take you through some of the features of SASS. So if you're wondering why you want to use SASS over normal CSS, well, SASS can reduce the repetition of CSS. You might already be familiar with utilizing CSS and you writing the same things over and over again. So SASS is going to help reduce some of that repetition, and it does that by adding features that isn't available with traditional CSS. And like I said, we're going to go through some of those features and hopefully you can see some of the benefits of utilizing SASS. So the first thing we need to do really is to have some way of processing this SASS code, because this SASS code that we write is going to be eventually turned into normal CSS that we can use on a regular website, for example. But first of all, we need some software. Now, you can, you'll probably find that in your IDE or your text editor, there are plugins available for your particular IDE or text editor. Probably one of the most simplistic way of starting off with SASS is by using this Scout app. So I've gone to scout-app.io and I've selected downloads and Windows, and we're just going to download and install this simple program. So once you've downloaded the Scout app, you'll find that this isn't a normal program where you install. You just simply need to extract this file that's been downloaded. Okay, so when you extract, this folder opens, and we then go into the folder that's just been extracted, and you can see that there's a Scout app folder, and inside of here is the package or the software. So I'm just going to run the Scout app. There we go, and the first thing it needs is a project. So we're now going to build a simple project on the desktop. So if we right click and just make a new project folder, or wherever you want to make your new project. I've already got a project folder, and inside of this project folder you can see that I've created a new folder called CSS and SCSS, and I've also built an index page. So if I open that up in my IDE, open the folder, so you can see here that my project consists of two folders, two empty folders, CSS and SCSS, and I've got an index page which is ready to link to my CSS page, which is going to be called main.css. So the last thing to do is to add the project to the Scout app. So I just press add. I'm on the desktop, look for my project folder, press OK, and you can see what it's done here. It's got an input folder and an output folder. And I'm going to select production output style, which I'll explain in a while. So that's my project set up. So the basic overview here, what's going to happen and what this program does is it takes the SASS code that we develop, which is going to be in this folder, and then it changes it into CSS and puts it into the CSS folder. And of course our index page will then just link to the normal CSS that's been generated by this program. So that's the general workflow here. So the first feature I want to show you is import. So import is a great way of breaking up your CSS into smaller chunks, and that allows you a little bit more flexibility in terms of what CSS you use on your page. So let's just see that in action. So I'm going to create a new page. This is going to be the main page. So I'm going to call this main.scss, and on this page I'm going to load up all the files I want to import into my project, or the CSS I want in my project. And so that's going to make sense hopefully in a second. So what I need to do is use the @import, and then basically I need to define what I want to import. So I'm going to create a file called 1 in a second, and I'm going to import that. So what I need to do now, if I want to import a file, these smaller files with CSS snippets, they need to be named with an underscore. So underscore, and then the name of the file, which was 1, and then the file extension SESS. So obviously what I can do now here is I can import more. So maybe I want 2 as well. Now a good example of this is if you download Bootstrap, for example, you'll see that the Bootstrap utilizes this type of facility, and you can swap out and change what kind of tools you want to use with Bootstrap. So we're creating a new file, _2.sess. So now I'm going to import both of these snippets of code into this one file. So the workflow here is that I place code inside of these files here, 1 and 2, and then they get imported into this one page. And then what happens then is the Scout app will then take that code and translate that all into CSS and make a new file and put it into the CSS folder. So what I end up with is just normal CSS, and of course my index page is looking for that file that doesn't exist just yet, called main.css inside of this folder. Now in this setup, if you call your file here main, for example, then this Scout app is going to create a new CSS page, a normal CSS page called main.css. So if you change that to something else, then the CSS page will be called that something else. So what we need to do now is to tell, to turn on the Scout app so that we can see that in action. So if I press start here on the Scout app, we now just going to add some simple code, say in here. So just some basic, in this case, basic CSS, background color, red. I press save. When I press save, I hear a beep because this has been now processed. So what's happened now is this code here has been imported onto this page here, and now it's been processed by the Scout app, and that CSS is just been placed into this new file, and you can see that what the output is of that. And of course now my normal HTML page will be picking up and utilizing this CSS. So that's a simple example of import, and of course this can be scaled up, so I can add more files here if I wanted to. So the point I was making is that in your project you can build these small chunks or small files up with CSS, and then you can decide whether you want to import them or not. So maybe you want to just experiment with a new design or a new set of colors, for example, or you want to make a light mode and a dark mode. You're just testing different things out. Well, you can utilize this type of functionality, for example, by creating small chunks of code and then deciding whether you want to import that or not in your project and test it out. And secondly, you can see how this flow is working now. We write our code inside of these small bit files, and they get imported into this main, and then the Scout app will then translate that and build this main.css page with the normal CSS code. Okay, so the next feature of SASS, variables. So SASS allows us to utilize variables to configure and create code. So here, this is an example, so I've changed it slightly. I've now got a part file called variables, and then I've gone back into the main, and the main .scss, and obviously I'm importing variable. So you can see here I've set up 3 variables, BG color, text color, and font size, and they have the parameters light blue, dark blue, and 20 pixels. So I go ahead and create my selectors, div BG, background color, and then you can see here what's happening is light blue is going to be applied right here. So with the H1 tag, I've got color, text color. So here I'm going to be applying dark blue, and then font size variable is going to include 20 pixels. So if I go back to my index page, you can see now I've created a very simple div which has the class div BG and the H1 tag with the word heading in it. So let's just see that in action. There we go. So one thing that's potentially missing from there, you'll notice that div-bg, it should have a background color of light blue. So what's happened is that I didn't save this page. You can see here that file to import not found or unreadable. So here I've got some more errors. You can see here actually it's okay. So if I go back now and refresh this page, there we go. So it's important to make sure that when you're utilizing SASS, you make sure you save the page, because when you save the page, that initiates the Scout app to process that page, and then it will give you an output, an error or success, whether you've typed in the information correctly. So hopefully you can see the flow here. These are variables with the attributes or the values. They're going to be applied to your code as and when you want them. Of course, the benefit here, one of the benefits is that if you've got thousands of lines of code and you want to change a color and apply it throughout the whole website, then obviously you only need to change the code once rather than going through every single selector looking for that color. So let's remember that the code from variable, this part file, is going to be placed here. The Scout app is then going to process that information and then create our CSS page. And you can see that that's been applied. So light blue, H1, dark blue, and font size 20. And of course, our index page is still connected to this main.css. And we set up this simple div to show the classes and CSS is working properly. So to add to this, to add to variables, we might sometimes want to override some of the variables for different selectors. So let's have a look at variable scope. We'll give you a brief overview of variable scope. So going back into my code, here we've got our variables. So for example, background color is light blue. So if I were to, or if I wanted to, change the background color, for example, what I need to remember is that these variables are considered global. So any of these selectors can utilize these variables. But like I said, if I wanted this selector not to use the background color or variable light blue, I can change the variable. And I've done so right here by just typing in the same syntax again, but I've changed the name of the color. Now this variable will only work within this selector. So for example, if I create a new selector and utilize the variable again, this variable won't work across to this selector. It will then still utilize the global variable. So this will still be light blue. However, we can override a global variable, and we can do so by utilizing the exclamation mark global afterwards. So if I get rid of this, what I can do now is make this background color variable now global, and that's going to overwrite the existing variable. So what you'll find now is that this variable here won't be utilizing the original color. It will now be utilizing the new global variable, which has the value of gray. So this variable here will be gray and not the light blue. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That's a little bit about variable scope and how we have global and we have variables contained, or local variables contained within the selectors. Okay, so far we've created some imports. So we've got this main file, and we're importing this part file, variable, excuse me, and you can see that's then being processed into this file here called main.css, and our index page is utilizing main CSS to display the information on the page. So we then had a look at variables. So we set up some simple variables, And we then moved on to the variable scope, by which we overrode or overwritten, replaced these global variables. So we replaced background color. So the original was background color, light blue, and then we created a override for that variable inside of this selector by utilizing the word global and the exclamation mark. So what's happened here is that the light blue is being applied to here. So this background color is going to be light blue. But you can see down here, we then create an override for this variable, and we make it gray. So this here is going to be utilizing this variable, which is gray. And then because now this is the global variable, this is now gray too. And we can see that in place because if we go to the main file, we can see that this background color is light blue. This background color is gray because that's where we overwritten the global variable, or replace the global variable. And then you can see this is now gray as well. So hopefully that all makes perfect sense. And we can now move on to the next thing, which is nesting. So nesting allows us, or SASS allows us to nest CSS selectors in a similar manner. Nesting is a shortcut to creating CSS rules. So let's just have a look at this example. So I've placed some code here, and you can see that these selectors are nested within the nav. So let's just have a look to see what that looks like. So I press save and go back to my main, and you can now see that we've got nav UL, nav LI, and nav A. So you can see how that's nicely being nested. I previously mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about this environment selection options here. So this really refers to the CSS output, what we want to be displayed and how we want it to be formatted. So the output of this main.css page. So for example, if I select compressed and just make a change, press save, so it updates our main.css page, you can see that our CSS is compressed. There are no blank spaces. Now, if you research online, there's a lot of research which suggests that this actually improves the loading of the page because everything's compressed. There's no white space. This can be this CSS can be processed by the browser a lot more effectively and quicker than if you had some white space. So if you're using or generating code for your website and it's actually going to be online, it's probably better off utilizing the compressed option. Now, for example, you can select and have a look at some of the other formats. So for example, output style is just however it's been typed in to the CSS. Output. I'll start again. Output style, that's just the default style. So whatever you've typed in here, that's what it's going to look like, this main.css page. If you were to look at some of the other options, for example, expanded. So let's save that. Make some changes so it updates the main CSS page. That's what that looks like. Wonderful. Compact. So again, I just make an update and save. Oh, sorry, actually in our SCSS page. So it now gets updated like that. So you can see some of the differences here with the outputs. So the next feature, Mixins. So we can create a mixin, which is essentially just a piece of code that we can reuse. So let's just build a simple mixin. So here we go. So we use the @mixin and then the name of the mixin. And then we just add our CSS as per normal. And in order for us to actually utilize this mixin, well, we just need to basically use the @include function. So create a new selector as you like, and then you can see we use the @include there, and that's basically going to take this code here and it's going to place it right here. So this is text important. So let's just see that in action in the main. So down here you can see we've got color, font size, font weight, border and background color. So you can see how it's taken these items and it's basically placed it right here. Color, font size, font weight, border. So that's a simple example of a mix-in. So we can place mix-ins at the top, for example, and then we can utilize where we need to repeat this code a lot in different selectors. So that's a simple example of a mix-in. So the next feature, extend. So this is a nice feature which we can utilize. So this is a simple selector with some attributes here, or declaration attributes here. And we've now created this new selector called button home. And what we've done is we use the extend, and we've named the button standard here. So what's happening here essentially is that this button home wants to use all of these attributes here, but it also wants to have a background color of red. So if we have a look on the main CSS, what happens here, if I save it, you can see here that we've got the normal button standard, but also button home is now also utilizing these attributes. And you can see that button home has a separate area, which is having the background color of red. So this is extend. And then the last point I'm going to make is in terms of comments, not only can we use multi-line comments, but we do also now have available single line comments that we can utilize. There we go. So that's a simple overview of some of the features that's included with SASS.